Get set, podcast listener, and be ready to win with your mentor, motivator, and marketer, Cam Roberts. Grow your business and achieve your goals quickly with the latest tips, tools, and tactics on business, success, and marketing. Subscribe now and download your free resources at camroberts.com.au.
Everyone, Cam Roberts here, your friend in business, success and marketing. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast show. Today's very special guest is Katie Jefcoat. Now, Katie is the host of Everyday Happiness, a daily micro podcast, a happiness curator, kindness curator, speaker and author. She fundamentally believes we deserve to make time for our priorities. As a happiness curator, Katie details happiness science into bite-sized nuggets for her audience. She's obsessed with the idea that kindness is contagious and spreading kindness everywhere. Katie, thank you very much for joining the podcast show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I've got to ask you, as we kick off, where did this idea for, everyday happiness come from?
Well, to be honest with you, it's nothing that I thought I would do. It took a little bit of introspection. I am a trial lawyer by trade here in America. And so that means I was like a barrister, probably is what you would call it in Australia. And I did that for a long time and had kids. And then COVID hit us here in America and we were in lockdowns, much like the rest of the world. And life felt hard. It felt a little bit like it was a dumpster fire everywhere. And coming from a background of needing proof as a lawyer, I just had to figure out how we could find happiness when it felt like the world was crumbling around us. And so at the very beginning of COVID, I decided that I was going to prove why happiness matters in a more scientific approach, which lots of scientists do this and talk about it. And I curate all of my content from scientists from Yale and Harvard Business School and so many great thought leaders, but not everybody wants to sit and read digests of scientific journals. So I decided I would do 2 or 3 minutes a day, get out some happiness tips, some happiness, a little bit every single day. And it started out just to help me. And then I created a podcast around it.
Excellent. I love it. I love the story. That's quite a big difference between being a lawyer and being someone that has a podcast on happiness, isn't it?
It is. And, when I was practicing law, there wasn't as much happiness. There wasn't a lot of work-life balance.
I'm sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone was at each other's throats. So the idea that we can have both, we can win at work and succeed at life. We can have happiness. We can create happiness. Part of our happiness is within our control. Just lights my hair on fire. I'm so excited to learn more about it. And I can't help but want to, share it with not just my friends sitting around my kitchen table, but anyone else that wants to listen.
Excellent. You spoke about the differences between, being a lawyer where it was so competitive. We get a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, people, tune into the Personal Brand podcast show and, they're running businesses, they're entrepreneurial, and people get into business because they're passionate about something, but soon, somewhere along the line, the wheels start turning a bit slower. It gets a bit harder. You got to pull yourself out of the trenches and stuff like that. So what can you say to those people that are business owners, entrepreneurs, and, they're going through some tough times at the minute? It might not be related to COVID. It just might be the market or conditions or, personal stuff. What can you say to them that's going to kind of help them, feel better to run a better business?
Well, I think the very first thing is to honor our feelings. I think so many of us that are type A business owners doing all of the things, we just want to push that down and keep moving forward. We want to just, push forward any way that we can. And I think if we can just take a pause, check yourself, take a quick pause, be how can we, really honor what is happening? Are we overwhelmed? How do we reduce that? I always say randomness causes overwhelm. So if we're feeling overwhelmed, is there randomness that's causing it? Is our calendar, doesn't have enough buffer of time? We're not living in our priorities. We can be busy and be balanced, right? We can do all of these things in this season. But I think as entrepreneurs, we're just constantly on the hamster wheel. And at some level, we have to take a breath. Now, happiness, you're never going to be happy every single day. That's not what happiness is. And happiness isn't getting someone from feeling depressed to being happy. That's a whole different ball game. Like that's mental health. What I'm talking about is how we control that 20% of, happiness that is in our control. That's our, not our genetics, not our circumstances, but what we get to control. And I just really like to dig into that section.
Yeah, that's really good. And how important is it to not be on the swing of either side? Like, I guess entrepreneurs, business owners can be super happy and excited when they win big projects and clients. And then at the other times in the lean times, they're not so happy. So how do you avoid those big swings of the pendulum?
I think that's really, just depends, right? That's all of your emotion. Like I have a big personality. You have a big personality. My husband is very even. My daughter, who's 14, very even. So part of that is just genetics. And what we find is that entrepreneurs tend to have bigger personalities, right? We like that and we thrive on that. And so really it's just staying grounded and staying in, and we can go over some of this, but really just in your gratitude, in what matters most to you in this season of life.
Yeah,
I have this concept that I talk about sometimes called intentional margins. It's finding the buffer of space and time to create harmony between your to-dos and your priorities. You have less swing when you have harmony. I wouldn't say balance because balance is even. Nothing's ever even. But when you have that harmony in your to-dos and your priorities, so you're still marching to the same drum.
Yeah, I like that concept of being able to put in those buffers to kind of, not just protect yourself, but actually, make sure that there's time for you and you're not controlled by someone else's time. Do you find that a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, get carried away by someone else's schedule, whether it's people booking in their calendar or, demanding things or checking emails or social media?
I totally agree. I think if you're looking at your calendar and it's everyone else's priorities, we could check ourselves.
Right, yeah.
And also, I think an email is sometimes like a global to-do list.
Right.
It's other people putting to-dos on your list via email. So both of those things can, contribute to this feeling of randomness and overwhelm, right? Because it's other people's priorities. And so it's just managing our boundaries. And boundaries can be incredibly flexible.
Yeah.
Boundaries don't have to be so rigid. They can actually give you more flexibility because then you know what buckets you have to do the things that matter most for you in this season of life.
Yeah, that's good.
That changes.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to back up for a little bit because you mentioned something about gratitude, and I want to touch on that a little bit more for the folks that are listening. Like, how does one develop that gratitude so they do feel different on a daily basis? Like, what specifically can people do around gratitude?
Yeah, so I think what our biggest thing is that kindness and gratitude and happiness is really like a recipe, right? Some people make chicken soup one way and some people make it another way. It's just a recipe. And I think sometimes we get caught up in semantics when we talk about gratitude, because what we're really saying is appreciation.
Right.
So gratitude or appreciation, I think they're both the same.
Yeah.
So if we're building a recipe for happiness, one of the things that we know scientifically is that gratitude will boost happiness because it forces you to look at the positive.
Right.
It just scientifically, it's the way that our neurons work in our brain. I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to get into the way our brain works, but you can go Google it if you want to. But we have little things in our brain and they fire off, and gratitude helps that.
Right.
So we know that gratitude helps. Now, gratitude can be writing in a gratitude journal. That works for someone. It can be sending a quick text message every morning to 2 different people to say, hey, I'm really grateful for you, or hey, I was thinking about you, this happened or that happened, or, really appreciate, this thing you did last week. It can be, it can be so many things. It can be saying thank you to the barista at the local coffee shop. What matters is that you mean it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not fake. You're not doing it for like altruistic reasons. You're doing it,
Yeah.
you're doing it to try to, mean it. You want to be authentic. So gratitude in whatever way works for you will work to boost happiness.
Right.
Another thing you could put into this recipe of sorts would be kindness. Now, I believe that kindness is contagious. And the minute we start showing kindness, good things just happen. Like, you don't get a piece of mail and like be like, this is so nice, somebody wrote me a letter, and then kick your dog. No, you're nice to people. You like think about it. It's so fun. You're like, this is great. Maybe you tell a friend, I got a letter in the mail. How often do we get that? Which is, why I love sending mail. I just think it's so much fun. But one of the, if I'm doing 3 things to put in your, recipe for happiness, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about social connection.
Right.
Because social connection with people that lift you up is so important for happiness. And it is one of the easiest ways to boost your happiness. Getting on the phone with someone that inspires you or that you like to talk to, doing maybe even a text message, going to have coffee with someone, having a dinner. Social connection is really where it's at.
That's really good. And it's probably worthwhile noting that social connection is different to social media connections. Like, just because you've got 5,000 friends on Facebook or Snapchat or wherever, like, that's not the same. That's not what you're talking about, right?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Social connection, for us to have like oxytocin and to get those dopamine hits chemically, we have to be able to look the person in the eyes. And it's better if we're in person. So video conferencing would be secondary to actually seeing someone in person. But social media doesn't count. So there's so many reasons why that isn't true connection. And what happens is people feel lonely and they go to social media and then they still feel lonely.
Of course.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It's not the same.
Yeah, that's good. I like that concept of, being in person with people, because people can get so busy, right? And like you said, there's so many Zoom meetings and let's catch up on Zoom. And, and often you'll catch up on Zoom with someone and they might be like 5 minutes away from your office or where you work. You could catch up together and go for a walk or get outside or catch up for a coffee. So it makes a really big difference on the impact of that connection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, if you think about happiness is 2 prongs. The first prong is your emotions. It's your feelings of joy and elatement and, like that, like what you would consider happiness. But really, there's this second prong that's purpose and satisfaction.
Right.
So purpose is doing what matters to you. And satisfaction is having what you have divided by what you want. So when you want what you have instead of the bucket list of all the things you don't have, you have satisfaction, however that looks for you.
Yeah, that's really good. And let's change gears for a little bit. Like you talked about at the start, you mentioned how, you were a lawyer and then COVID hit and everyone was kind of feeling a bit unhappy, restricted and all of that sort of stuff. Like, what happens when the next shitstorm comes, excuse the French? Like, how do people, get through that? Because the news is just bombarding, their approaches to bombard people these days. And it seems like it's never ending. Once the next catastrophe comes along, whether it's financial or, virus related or whatever it is, how do people shield themselves or insulate themselves from that type of negative energy or activity?
Yeah, that's really, really insightful, because the next thing will happen.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
But really, what what the scientists say is what you focus on grows, right? So it starts with you. And I would add that, you know, we can influence our bubble, and whatever that bubble is, we get to influence the people around us in that bubble. And if they do the same, you really can just start to create that ripple effect.
Yeah, right.
Just by creating that bubble and setting boundaries on what you consume, what you read, what you listen to, what you talk about. That stuff matters, and it's our responsibility to find happiness. So that doesn't mean that bad things don't happen in the world or happen in our family or whatever. And that doesn't mean that we aren't sad about things, but it's our responsibility to find happiness. And that doesn't mean that we're insensitive to the rest of the world around us, that we don't have compassion for what's happening just because we're choosing to, look for a little bit more of the bright side.
Excellent. Now, I know you're in the US, I'm in Australia, and I know that you have some sort of postcard or letter system there. Do you want to kind of touch on that a little bit and how that helps people stay connected and access happiness?
Sure. So I have a product line called Kindness Cards, and right now they are available in the US, hopefully worldwide soon. But what it is it's a postcard, and the postcards are, you are amazing, you are magic, thinking of you, sending you a smile. And it's so convenient because the postcard only gives you a tiny amount of space. So you don't have to feel like you have to write a novel in order to get a note out, right?
Yeah.
Which is always my trouble with greeting cards. I love greeting cards, but I always had to feel really inspired.
Yeah, what do you write? Yeah.
So, and it's a quick stamp. And what that does is like you scientifically get a boost of happiness when you send a note card. And look, it doesn't have to be my kindness cards. You can buy whatever you want. You can make your own. You can send them with a carrier pigeon. It doesn't matter. But you get a boost of happiness. The mail carrier will get a boost of happiness. They'll see it. And then the person receiving it will get a boost of happiness. And there's a ripple effect, when kindness is contagious. And that's how we can start to show up in a world that we want to live in.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, well, Katie, we're almost out of time. But before we wrap up, if someone's interested in your cards or they want to connect with you or listen to your podcast, where should they go and how do they find you?
Sure. So my podcast is everywhere that podcasts are. Pick your favorite platform. It's called Everyday Happiness, Finding Harmony and Bliss. And it's about 2 minutes a day of happiness science. And then my name, Katie Jefcoat, Jefcoat, Katie Jefcoat. That's at katiejefcoat.com. And you can find all the things happening, and all the social medias there too.
Excellent. Well, Katie, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.